Hello there everyone. Today I'm going to show you how to make this wire woven bracelet where I've added in some beads along the way as well. And this is the final piece that I've made. So it looks like this. So I'm doing a regular wire weave here. This is the Aztec wire weave. And then what I'm doing though along the way is I'm adding in little seed beads to add this really big impact of some colour as well. It gives a really totally completely different effect, I think, adding in those beads. You can really play around with both the colours of your material, so the beads and the wire, but also maybe play around with the patterning. So instead of using one colour of beads, you can add in more different colours. So there's really loads of options there. So if you want to learn how to make this, then keep watching. So these are the materials here that we're going to need. Now first of all, I have 2 gauges of wire. They're both regular round silver coated copper wire here. The first one is a 1mm thickness gauge. This is going to be the base wire that we're going to weave around and also add our beads to. And the other gauge here is a 0.4mm, and this is then going to be the weaving wire we're going to wrap around the base wire. And then as for the beads, I'm using these 80 Miyuki seed beads here, and I'm just using a silver line cobalt colour. You can obviously choose whatever colour you want to, but it's got to be the 80 size to fit perfectly within this technique. And then finally we have the findings that we're going to use as well. So I've got some little ribbon ends here. I'm going to use these to finish off the bracelet at the end, so we're going to get a nice professional finish on a bracelet. And these ones are 13mm in the width of them. They're going to fit perfectly with this one that I'm going to be doing today. And then we have the findings, so extender chain, jump rings and lobster claw clasp. That's just what I'm going to be using. You can obviously use whatever clasp and extender chain or not that you want to. So let's get it all together and let's get going. So then what we need to do is cut the lengths of wire that we're going to need for the base wires first of all. And what I have here is 6 lengths of my 1mm thickness wire of about 25 centimeters each. So that's what I'm going to be doing. This is a little bit longer than what we need for the bracelet, but I'd rather work with a bit more at the ends and then cut it down so we can get just the right size at the end. And then as for the weaving wire that we're going to need, we need a length of a 0.4mm here of about 3 meters. Now you can either work with this, so cut off your length and work with this, or if you're more comfortable, if you want less wastage, you can also work off the reel, but that's completely up to you. So then to get started, what we need to get out is first of all the base wires that we cut ready here, so all 6 of them. So I'm getting them ready, then I'm also getting some of my beads ready here. So just like that, I've got my 80 seed beads. And then what I'm also going to be using in this case is a clamp. Now it's not necessary, it's just, it can help a little bit, especially at the beginning here, because we're going to have to get the whole thing started off. And it's going to be a little bit fiddly, so using a clamp like this is just a regular spring clamp, it can be really helpful. But it's not necessary if you don't have one. You could always just hold it with your fingers. I've done that as well, it works fine. You obviously just got to be able to hold on to it nicely and securely, or something like electrical tape or something like that. So just find whatever works for you. And then what we need to do is get our wires ready, because before we just add it onto the clamp and before we start weaving, we just need to make sure that we have our spacing correct. So what we want to do is lay all our lengths of wire kind of just close to each other here. And then we need to get the spacing correct first, and to do that I'm going to actually use the beads themselves here, because if we just went on, started with the weave straight away, what you would find is you would weave together like you would normally do this type of weave, but then you would find that then when you want to add your beads after you've done that first section of weave, you can't push the beads all the way down as far as you want them to go, right close to the weave, because the weave, if you're just using the wires here without the spacing of the beads themselves first, it's going to get too tight, so there won't be enough space to push the beads all the way down. So that's why I'm actually going to use the beads first of all to help me with that. So I'm just going to separate out, get them a little bit easier to work with. And then what we need to do is start adding them in the pattern just to begin with. So these beads that I'm adding now, these are temporary. We're going to take them back off again. We just need them at the beginning to help us with the spacing, like I said. So I'm going to add one to the bottom there. And then one on the next one up. So constantly just moving to the next one. We're basically just adding one bead to each length of wire, and we're starting from the outer side and then working our way across, and that's how we want to add them all the way across here. And obviously don't worry too much about yet if you kind of lose grip and they swap places, because we can still adjust it. That's the whole point, we're trying to get it in the right position first. So you push it down, you can see just spacing them out just nicely there. Work our way all the way to the last one. Second to last one, push it down, and then the very last one also needs one on. Just like that, and all the way down. So there we go, and that's also how I want it to sit, because that's going to follow the line of our first weaving that we're going to do. Now what I want to just do is push them down towards the end, without obviously having them fall off. Because we always want to start our weaving and the bracelet from one end and then work our way across. So that's why I wanted to add the beads here before we added our wires into the clamp. Because obviously once they're in the clamp as well, if you're using that, that's going to then be hard to then space out the wires as well. So I'm leaving my beads there, making sure they're pushed close together and stay in that kind of diagonal line. So just like that. If they've moved, swap places, just make sure you reposition them. Then I'm going to take my clamp, put the ends of my wire here inside my clamp, and they're going to fit just perfectly like that. And then you can push all these beads all the way down. Now they can still swap position because obviously we haven't started the weaving yet, but that's what we're then going to do next. But just to begin with here, we then have our beads in place to make sure we get our spacing nicely once we then start making the wrapping now as well. So then to do the wrapping, to start that off, I'm going to get out the length of 0.4mm wire here that I already cut already, or if you left it on the reel, just use it from there. And then we just need to fasten this first, so I'm just going to put the very end behind and then just keep hold of that little tail. Then I just want to wrap it around just about once on the very bottom base wire here, just so we can have a place to start off the weave from, and the weaving wire here is nicely and securely wrapped. So once we have it in place, there's not really any need to do any more than that, because starting it up with the weave now that we're going to do, that's also going to then help secure the wires. So hold on to it like this, and then the weave that we're going to be doing is the Aztec wire weave. So we're going to basically be creating little triangles or pyramids, however you look at it. So what I'm going to do is I'm coming from behind, below the bottom wire. I'm going to go back across the top, and then we need to go across the top of two of our base wires. So I'm going to come down between the two bottom ones here. Just bring it all the way out and then down between the two. So we're going to cross two base wires and then come down between the next two. Now here you want to just be aware, make sure you don't pull your weaving wire too tight, because that's going to close up the space in between the base wires, and that's exactly what we want to avoid, which is why we put those beads in to begin with in the first place, to make sure we keep that spacing. What I want to do is wrap around twice on each level. So I've gone around once, I'm going to go around again, around the same two base wires that I've just gone around, push it down. So what I would recommend with this is that you don't pull too tight when you're weaving your base wire, your weaving wire around the base wire here, because like I just said, it's going to end up closing up the base wires, and we need to be able to make sure. So I'm just going to pop up a bead here just to show you. We need to make sure that once we get past this point of weaving, that we can put on our next level of beads, and they can be pushed all the way down to the weaving wire there as well. So this is all we're making sure of, but I'm just taking it back off, we're not doing it just yet. We want to make our way all the way across to the top of here. So we wrapped around these bottom two wires twice. I'm going to go back up between the two that I wrapped around. So I'm coming up between the bottom two there now to step up once. So now I'm going to go across the top of the next two wires, base wires. So that means I'm actually, in my case here, because I'm using the 6 base wires, coming down in the middle of all of them. But just always think you're stepping up 2 wires, push that down, make sure you don't pull too tight on your weave. Go around the back of those 2 base wires now. So we're wrapping up again, up between the bottom 2 where we just came up, we're going up between them again. That was once. We need to remember go around each level twice. So I'm going down the same place again, wrapping around the same 2 base wires. And then to step up, we need to always then come up between the 2 wires that we just wrapped together. So that means I come up between those 2 that I just went across the top of. To step up, we'll go across the next two. So that means the top out of the ones that I just wrapped, and then the next one up. And then you can see my beads are just moving around, but just put them back in place, because it's just, the most fiddly is just basically the beginning here until we got the first section of weave in place. Then it gets much easier. Go down between the two wires there that we need to go down. So we're going across the top of two base wires, and then go down between the next. Come up in the same place that you were just coming up. Push it down. So even though we're not pulling on the wire, we still want to push it down so the weave itself becomes nice and tight and close together. Wrap around once more, but the same two, because we're doing it twice on each level here. And then we need to come up between the two wires that were just wrapped around, because we're stepping up once. Come up between those two. Get your beads in place here and get my way towards the top. Go up, wrap around the next two base wires. Come up in the same place that we were just coming up to be able to wrap around the same two base wires once more. Like that. And now to step up to the last one, we need to come up between the two that we just wrapped around. So just like that. And then go to go over the top two base wires, all we do is just go across the top. And as you can see, the way that I'm weaving, to avoid pulling on the weaving wire too much to close up the base wires, I'm kind of just guiding my wire around. So I'm laying it across the top, going around the back, to then come up between the same two and pushing it down. Again, I'm not pulling, I'm just pushing it down, then placing it across the top and basically just guiding it in place. So there we go. Now I've moved my way all the way from the bottom all the way up to the top, and this is basically the first set of weave that we're going to be doing. So then now to add in our next level here, you can see my top bead has kind of moved down a bit, but it doesn't matter because now we've actually got to the point where I can take my wires out of the clamp. Just still be careful because you can easily pull the wire through your weaving there. And you obviously want to avoid that, but what we can do now is get rid of these beads here, because these were just, like I said, for guides right at the beginning, and we're done with that now. Because what we're going to now go on to do is add in the first really level of proper beads, so in the proper pattern design that we're going to do. So the first ones were just for guiding the weaving wire, which we've done the first section of now. So I've taken them off just to kind of get them out of the way. It gets a bit easier to work with. I'm going to put my wires back in my clamp, just to make it easier to hold on to still, because it's still only the first level of weaving that we've done. It can still be a little bit fiddly until we get a bit further on and it's fastened more securely. So this is then the point where we need to start adding on this level of our beads that are going to help form the pattern that we're going to be doing in between the weaving here with the weaving wire. And we need to add these beads now before we work our way back downwards with the weaving wire, because obviously if we do that now, if we weave any more, it's going to make sure that we can't get our beads in the place that we want to. So we need to do it now. So what I'm going to do is place my first bead on the bottom wire here. So just take one of your beads, place it and let it drop all the way down here. Help push it all the way down. You can see, because we had the spacing with the beads in the beginning, that now fits all the way down. Then what I'm going to do is place my next bead on the next wire, so number 2 from the bottom, and push it all the way down, just like that. For the next level, I'm going to go back to the bottom one again. So we're kind of alternating our beads here on the wires. So on the bottom one again, what we're going to see, we're going to form a triangle. And then we need to skip over the second wire and place the next bead onto the third wire to be able to kind of make the shape of this triangle that we're going to do. Now we need to add one bead onto the second wire again, so the middle one out of the 3 that we've been adding to so far, just like that. And then we need to put a final bead right on the bottom one again. So these all together, you can see, form a nice triangle just like that. So then once we have these beads in place, exactly how we want them to sit, then we can move our way back downwards again with the weaving. And because we now added this section of beads, we don't have to be as concerned about the spacing, because these beads are already here to make sure that spacing stays the way we want it to be able to make the next section of beads after this. So to work our way back down, I've got my wire coming down around the back of the top one and down behind my base wires. And then now what we need to do, instead of stepping up every time, we need to basically step down. So that means I'm going to come behind 3 of my base wires and come up between, basically in the middle of all of them, but below that third one, because we then need to wrap around the 2, go across the next 2 there, but avoid that top one. Again, push this down, come behind the same 2, up between the same 2 that you just came up between, to be able to wrap around those same 2 again, because remember we're doing it around twice around each level, just like we did when we stepped up on the other side. Push that down. You still want to make sure you're not pulling your weaving wire too hard though. So we've done the first one to come back down again. Go down another one, so step down once more. We need to come behind 3 wires again. So always just think, when you're stepping down, we're going behind 3 wires. Push it down, don't pull, just push. And then over the top of 2 wires, so we're coming down between the 2 that we wrapped previously there. The double wrap on them. And again, to make sure we do it twice, we come up between the same wires, wrap over the front of both of those again to do the double wrap around that level. Step down, again behind 3 wires, and then over the top of the next 2 up. So that means we're coming down between the 2 that we previously wrapped, and twice in total to make it a double wrap, and push them together. Your weaves here, your wraps, so your wraps themselves on each level, they become nice and tight together, so you can avoid spacing and gaps there if you can. So now go behind 3 and then we're back on the bottom, so we just go all the way around the bottom wire and go over the top of the bottom 2 to wrap those 2 together as well, and again once more to make it a double. So there we go. So now we're basically caged in this whole section of our beads that form that little triangle, and you just want to make sure that everything sits correctly. You want to obviously do that along the way. So if any of these beads here kind of swap places, as you can see at one point mine kind of moved out a little bit, but just make sure to push it back before you reach that point, because once you then wrapped on this side, these are trapped in place and can't move around anymore now. So if they're in the wrong place, obviously you're going to have to undo it and then redo it again. So that's why it's better to make sure that you're keeping them in the right place as you go. But then this is basically the first part. Then what we need to do is start moving up again, and basically we're going to keep repeating the same thing over and over now. Obviously, every time we've done one section across, so from one side to the other, that's where we also need to remember to add in our next section of beads. So I'm just going to show you that again. It's the exact same thing. It's obviously just on the other side, so it's kind of mirrored to what we just did. So in this case, because it's from the top we're doing it instead of from the bottom, we need to start with the top wire. So I'm going to put 1 bead on that top wire, let it drop all the way down. Then I'm going to put 1 bead on the second wire from the top, and just let it drop all the way down there so that sits right next to that. And then just going to make sure the spacing is right. And then we need to place our next bead onto the top wire again. So there we technically have our first little triangle, so a tiny little triangle. But then we need to place the next bead on the third wire from the top. Remember, every time we're kind of doing this, we're skipping over a wire. Like that. So that's the top, the very tip of the triangle there, of the bead. Back to the middle of the 3, so that's the second from the top. Push that down. And then back to the very top one. We just add 1 bead to that one. And let it drop all the way down. So this is then the top ones, how they're going to sit on there. Make sure to push them in. And then basically what you want to do now is go back upwards again. So this is exactly the same that I showed you the very first wrap there. We take our weaving wire, start off with, we come up between the two that we just wrapped on the bottom, push it down, and then you want to just do your double wraps around each set of base wires there. So go around the top of the next two, do that twice, and then move your way all the way up to the top there. And then you caged in those beads as well. And you want to keep doing that, so you're basically zigzagging around from one side to the other with your weaving wire with that Aztec weave. We're just making sure we're adding those beads in between every single time we cross over to capture them in place. So you want to keep doing this, building however long you need it to be. Obviously measuring it along the way to make sure you don't make it too long or too short. But then once you get to the end, I'm then going to show you how we're going to finish it off. So now that I kept going here, you can see I've built up my weave, adding in my beads as well, all the way along. And then I've ended up with the length that I'm going to use. Now obviously measure it along the way to make sure you get the right length. And bear in mind to take into account the clasp that you're going to use as well, because that's going to take up some length as well. I'll add to the length of this. So what I'm going to do now is show you how to finish it off. It's going to be the same on both ends, so I'm just going to show you the one end here. Now what I have left is a length of a 0.4, and we've finished off making the double wrap around the top two wires. So what I want to do is when you finish off weaving wire, you always want to finish it off wrapping around a single wire on its own. So I'm just going to take it up between the two base wires that I've just wrapped to get it to wrap around the top one there, outer one just on its own, just a couple of times. So just wrap around here 2 or 3 times is fine. So something like that, and then what I'm going to do is go ahead and cut it off. So I'm going to take some flush cutters here, and I want to cut it off so it's kind of coming around towards the back again, and just basically almost get your cutters in between the two outer base wires and cut it down there, because then I'm going to get some chain nose pliers as well, and then you have a little end left that I'm then going to squish down, but then also roll my pliers in the direction that my weaving wire is going, and that's going to tuck it in. Basically the very end is going to end up in between those two base wires, so it's not going to end up on the outside of the bracelet, which would probably cause a problem with wearing it. So I'm going to finish it off there, make sure it's tugged in, you can't feel it from any of the sides, and then you got rid of your weaving wire like this. And then what I want to do is to be able to finish it off. These ribbon ends that we're going to use here, they're obviously making a straight line across, so I think it would look a little bit weird if I just finish it off like this. We have this little gap down here where there's no beads. So to accommodate for that, what I'm going to do is add just a couple more beads on the end, but I'm not going to do a full triangle. What we're basically going to do is half of a triangle. So I'm going to put one on the outside, and then one on the next wire, base wire in, and then again one on the outside one. So it's just building up the triangle like I was doing before, but we're not going to complete the triangle. And then one on the third wire as well, base wire there. So we basically have this, so you can see it's going to end up pretty much making a straight line across of all the base wires there. It's going to look a little bit nicer at the end. So now that we added these wires, what we have to do is finish off the ends, so the base wires, because obviously we've got a bit too much left, but also we want to make it nice and neat at the end. So to do that, I want to just have my ribbon end as reference here to be able to see, because some of these wires, then the base wires, are going to end up inside of the ribbon end. So we want to cut down so we have just about the right length to go inside of there. So we don't want to leave them too long, because then you'll have still a big gap of just the base wires, but also you don't want to leave too little, because then the ribbon end is going to actually end up maybe wanting to go on top of your beads and that, and you don't want that to happen. So what I'm going to do is the outer wires, so the one on each side, I'm going to leave a bit longer than the middle ones. So the 4 base wires in the middle, I'm going to cut the shortest, and I'm going to cut them quite short down, close to the beads. Obviously you want to just be careful, hold on to the beads as you're cutting this, so they're not going to fly off. So around something like this, so a few millimeters above where the beads are, and just cut them all the middle ones out. Just use the first one you cut off as a gauge for the next one. Just like that. So that's the 4 middle wires. Now what I want to do is cut down the outer ones, but I'm leaving them just a bit longer. Not too much longer, but just enough so we can just bend them in. something about like this, a few millimeters longer than the middle ones basically. And about the same on the other side. What I like to try and do sometimes when I want to cut them the same is I put my pliers, cutters there, against the one that I've already cut and put them across the other side, and then that gives me a gauge, a measurement basically for where to cut the one on the other side. So there we go. And obviously make sure you keep those beads on. If they fall off, just put them back on again. And then what I want to do is take a pair of flat nose pliers here, and then these outer ones, because they're a bit longer, I want to bend them in. That's why I left them longer. So basically I'm going to bend them in at a 90-degree angle inwards and basically lie straight above all the ends that we cut off of the middle ones. So put your pliers roughly where that bend is going to be, and then bend it inwards. Something like that. You can see it goes across like that. Just in over the other ones. So not overlapping, but it's laying right above where we cut them down. The same on the other side. And just in towards the middle. And also, that's why I didn't want to leave them too long here, those outer ones. So in the middle, they're basically just meeting almost against each other there, and also not overlapping. Because I'm avoiding having too many wires overlapping there at the end, or any if possible. Because obviously this is going to go inside the ribbon end, and the more wires you have overlapping here, the more bulk you're adding inside, which might make it difficult, and it might not make it fit that well. So this is going to fit just perfectly, you can see there. So now what we need to do is actually add the ribbon end and make it nice and secure. So before I add it, what I want to use as well is some glue, because I want to make sure to put some glue inside the ribbon end. It's going to give it that extra strong hold as well. I find it's going to be much more durable. So I'm just going to be using my E6000 here, and then just a toothpick to apply it with, because we just want to get a little bit inside really. It's not loads we're going to be using, just enough to coat the inside of the ribbon end. So take a bit of glue in my toothpick and then just get it inside the ribbon end, up and down the sides and right down to the bottom. And we don't want too much anyway, because it's just going to come spilling out when we clamp it down. So just a bit like that. And then I also like just putting some right on the end of my wires here, because then you get a really nice bond between the two parts when we then put them together. So a bit on both sides, just like that. And then I'm going to place on my ribbon end, right on the end there, grab my flat nose pliers, and we need to start clamping it down as well. And then all I'm going to do is I take my piece in my hand, hold my piece in my hand here, grab a finger on each side of that ribbon end to try and make sure it stays in place. Make sure your beads are pushed all the way down so they're not going to end up inside the ribbon end. And then we just start clamping it down. Now I like to just start from one side and gently go across, back and forth. And instead of, I don't like going into one place and just do a big squish, because I feel there's more risk of it than moving out of place. Whereas if you do it here a bit at a time, gradually, when you feel like you're almost clamped down all the way, take it out and just make sure it's sitting in the right place still, so it hasn't moved to the side or anything. And then once you're happy with that, then you give it one last squeeze all over. So make it really nice and tight and secure here. And give it a nice welly. So there we go. I also like to just make sure I clamp down the sides so they're not too open, and it just gives it a little bit extra security. So there we go. So that's how I finish off the end. And obviously you want to leave the glue to dry and also do the exact same thing to the other end. Then once you've done that, you can then add your findings, and then all that's left to do is then shape this length into the bracelet that we then can wear. So now that I've finished off both my ends here, and I've also attached my extender chain and my clasp, then what is left to do is bend it, like I said. So you can either, if you have something of the size and shape that you want it to be, you can either just mold it around that, otherwise you can just do it with your hands as well. So gently go back and forth a bit at a time. Now don't go in one place and just do a big bend, because that'll just misshape it. Gently go from side to side, more and more, get a more curve in there, gradually, as you can see, working our way towards getting that shape we want. Now personally, I prefer more of an oval shape rather than a round shape. It seems to fit the wrist a bit better, I think, but it's completely up to you. Also, what I just want to mention to remember to look out for is the weave that we've done. There is kind of a back and a front, so just before you start bending it here into shape, You just want to be aware of that. They kind of do have a back and a front to the weave, because they do, both sides, they look a bit different from each other. We'll keep going here, getting the shape that we want. Nice curves in place. You can see we're pretty much getting there. And then once you're happy, then obviously we can then use the clasp as well with the extender chain. And then you'll have your finished bracelet. So there we go. So that's how you make this. You get a really nice impact with this. So you're just basically doing wire weaving and then adding beads in along the way to get this really big impact. And obviously you can completely change out the colours of your beads and the wire. And what you could do is we'll experiment a little bit with the patterning of the beads, for instance, and maybe use different colours, so more than just one colour as well. So there's different options there, loads of possibilities to play around with. So that's how you make this pretty simple technique. A really nice and simple, but then also impactful bracelet, I think. So that's how you make this. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial and found it useful as well. It could also be fun to try and use this for other things. But otherwise, then thank you very much for watching. Hello everyone. Today I want to show you how to make these simple wire bracelets. And this is what they look like. So I've got two different versions here with the same technique, the exact same method of doing them. Just using different materials, as you can see. So this one I've got copper and blue hematite gemstones, and this one I've got silver wire and then like a copper but dark copper coated hematite. And then what I've done as well on this one is going to show you how to do in the video. On this one